Hey folks, as you know, I sometimes watch videos by other guitar channels and luthiers, players, makers, that kind of stuff. It's fun. It's an interesting little community. Some I like more than others. I just happened to catch a video by the Casino Guitars, the two guys that do videos and have good content, I have to say. And the reason why it caught my eye, I think the title of the video was why do you want to take a risk with a budget guitar or something like that. And of course that piques my attention, so I checked out the video. My first response is like, oh, they're going down the same old route that the guitar cork sniffers are going down. They're brand snobs. They're of course they own a guitar shop, so they're going to belittle all of the mail order guitars. And I think the guitar they mostly concentrated on were Harley Benton guitars. And the reason why they made the video is one of their customers came into the shop with, I don't know, 8 or 10 Harley Benton guitars that he wanted set up. And they said, they gave him the bill expecting him to say no, or the estimate, and he said, well, I got to do it, don't I? And they just couldn't believe that he was going to drop that kind of cash into these cheap mail order budget guitars. I have no idea what the bill was or what the issues were with those guitars. Having worked on a few Harley Bentons and other mail order guitars like this one, this is a Sawtooth, I kind of know the issues that they come with. But of course, I'm not a shop. I'm not a retail shop. I fix and set up for resale through the internet. I don't, or through a used market. I don't have a brick and mortar store, so I can't command those sorts of prices, either for guitars or for repair work, because if you go to a physical shop, you're just going to pay more. They have overhead. You're just going to pay more for everything. But it is interesting to hear it from their perspective, because their perspective is slightly different from mine. I've worked in stores, I've worked in shops, I've worked for wholesale supplying shops, so I kind of know the industry. But it's nice to hear a fresh perspective from an ongoing shop. One of the few that's probably survived outside of Guitar Center and Sam Ash over the last 20 years or so, and I'm glad to see that that's the case. And of course, they're very reputable and well known. I mean, Casino Guitars is, has a good reputation probably for good reason. And they do a lot of high-end stuff. We should point that out. So, the first reaction is like, okay, here we go. This is the standard response from people that stock and sell high-end Fenders and Gibsons and Custom Shop and Guild and Gretsch and all of the, higher brand guitars. Of course they want you to buy those. They don't want you to go mail order. They don't want you to go to Rondo. They don't want you to go to Thomann. They don't want you going to Guitar Fetish. They don't want you going to Monoprice or even buying budget guitars off of Amazon and eBay. They want you to buy from a shop and their shop. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, right? They want to be able to sell you a guitar. I get all that. I understand all that. They've got to survive. But then I started thinking, these people, or these guys, these repair guys, these luthiers that work in these types of shops, they get, dozens of people coming in a week wanting them to fix their guitars. And they're probably tired of people coming in with cheap off-brand guitars saying, hey, can you make this play like a Gibson or a Fender? And so they have they're coming at it from a slightly different angle. I get tons of these guitars and I set them up, make them play as well as possible, and then I move them on. I keep a few, but I move them on. However, I'm not repairing them for someone to have the ultimate experience. I am in a way. I'm setting them up and selling them sort of as semi-new or like new. But I think that's slightly different to somebody that owns one, is not happy with it, and then you've got to, repair it after they've had it for a while, or maybe they've done stuff to it. to make it a good guitar. I think there are some different challenges with that particular situation. So, I started thinking, this is like when I used to work at a violin shop, a very reputable violin. It was a double bass shop many years ago, but they did all violin family instruments. And the number of people that would come in with the worst factory-made, junky, poor wood, poor craftsmanship instruments. In a lot of cases, green, warped wood. And back then, I'm talking 25 years ago, made in China, was a lot more of a problematic statement than it is now. I mean, you still had good makers from the Asian companies, but you had a lot higher percentage of junky instruments. I think Asian manufacturing has improved no end, and you can get some real bargains today, but it wasn't quite to that level, let's say in 1995 when I started working in this shop. And people would bring in these violins that they picked up on eBay. eBay was in the early days, back in those days, or through, what was it back then? The local used trader newspaper ads. They'd buy something, they'd pay over the odds for it. They'd buy a violin for $150 because they didn't want to buy the one from the violin shop for, let's say, $500. And they'd buy the cheap option, and then they'd bring it in either right away because it wouldn't play, or they'd bring it in after the kid had abused it for, a few months. And they'd say, fix this, but I don't want it to be too much because then I could have just bought the better one. And you're just looking at them saying, there's nothing, I can't make this a good violin. I can put nice parts on it, I can make it sort of play, but it's never going to be up to the quality of a nice European-made, like a German 19th century or early 20th century model. It's just not possible. And I just remember the tedium of people bringing in really awful instruments that they shouldn't have bought, and they spent way too much on them because they thought they were getting a bargain, and then we had to try and fix them. And some we could sort of salvage and make serviceable instruments out of, but the old adage, silk purse cow's ear. It was one of those types of things. Well, what I felt from those days, I thought, well, that must be what these guys. That must be kind of the perspective that these casino guys are coming from. Is people, this guy bought 8-10 Harley Benton guitars, couldn't set them up. Took them to a shop and wants these guys to set them up, and it's going to cost him more than it would have cost to buy decent higher brand name like a Fender Player series or something like that. And these guys are going, what's the point? You bought from Thomann this mail order guitar to save money. Now you're going to put all this money into it, and you could have just bought much more reputable guitar in the first place. I understand that mentality. I understand how tired they must be of getting people bringing in, mono price guitars or Larrys or Licks Pros and wanting them to fix them. They'd much rather work on Kiesels or old carving guitars or something like that. So yeah, I kind of, after at first thinking that it was a typical sort of snobbish, brand snob response, and I thought, they're coming from a perspective of people coming to their shop and wanting them to remedy these cheap guitars. A lot of the time, they're probably tired of doing it. However, they make money off of that. If somebody's willing to have a Harley Benton or a Indio set up, why not take their business and set it up? You'd think they'd be glad of that sort of phenomenon in the market. But the second time, they're probably tired of doing, trying to salvage guitars that they think are substandard, and which ends up costing the customer as much as it would have to just buy a decent guitar in the first place. So I kind of understand it from both sides. I thought it was interesting discussion, and it's interesting to bring it up here. We've had discussions along these lines, but to get this perspective of an independent guitar shop that has, sort of survived the Guitar Center boom and the closing of smaller market shops, that are concentrating on, you know, higher end guitars for their clientele. You know, for them to then have a slew of, you know, what they consider to be substandard guitars coming in and clogging up their repairs. You know, maybe you can understand a little bit of the attitude. Maybe you can't. Maybe you think that's ridiculous. You know, work is work. If somebody brings in Harley Bentons and is offering you money to fix them, that's as good a money and as good of a job as if they'd bought in their vintage guitars for you to set up. You know, we shouldn't look, you know, good business in the face and scoff at it. Interesting. I wonder what your thoughts are on this whole issue. Do you think guitar shops have a right to sort of snoot at these mail order guitars and the problems they pose in the used market, in the repair market? And do you think they should take umbrage with the fact that somebody spent money on those guitars and now wants to spend more money on having them set up, and they could have just bought a decent guitar from that shop in the first place? Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of see it from both sides. I've been on both sides of the equation. I slightly think that you know, and they were you know, careful not to bash Harley Benton. They said they'd come across some good ones, and some of them set up fantastically, but other ones you know, had issues and weren't really worth investing in. So it's the old QC argument. You know, we've talked about these companies and how they have so little QC that it really is a gamble ordering one of these online budget model guitars. And I think they're just sort of reinforcing that from their standpoint. And of course, they have all the guitars on their racks that customer could have bought. So there's a little self-interest there as well, I think. And I think they would be honest if asked. That yes, they would rather sell that person a Fender Player Series guitar than fix up their old Harley Benton. However, it's an interesting perspective. It's slightly different from mine, so I'm willing to sort of look at things from their viewpoint. We have a lot of people that on this channel that watch regularly. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on these types of shops and the attitudes they have towards budget brand guitars. If you think it's warranted, if you think, you know, they're just representing things from their perspective, or do you think that you know, this sort of brand snobbery is a bit of a hurdle in the industry that you know, perhaps could be avoided? Or do you think that perhaps, you know, Harley Benton's not that much worse than some of the lower ends of the brand guitars? You know, why spend was it $500 on an Epiphone or $400 on a Squier? That's how much the big budget brands are going for now, which is why the market is being driven to Harley Benton and Agile and all those brands, or even the cheaper brands like Glary and Licks Pro, because, you know, people are priced out of Epiphones and Squiers. So of course they're going to gravitate towards something like this as an alternative that they can pick up for $120, $140 rather than the $350, $400 Squier. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? I just thought it was an interesting scenario, so I thought to bring it up. All right, folks, see you in another one.